I think that there are actually two types of shame. There's a healthy shame that serves a good purpose. And then there's an unhealthy shame or a toxic shame, or sometimes it's called a carried shame that does not serve us well. And so I think a big part of recovery is learning to distinguish between the two.
So let's talk about this. What is shame?
Okay. Shame is an emotion. All right. It's both a complex emotion and yet not as complex as guilt would be. Okay, in terms of just development and the psychological development and neurobiological development necessary to experience shame versus guilt. Guilt is a more developed emotion, but shame is pretty developed as well, because shame is what we feel when we become conscious of what we believe other people see when they look at us. So it's called a pro-social emotion. So it's very much about the relational space, right? And so shame is something that comes up in us when we're in a moment experiencing the pain and or fear of being disconnected from another or others. All right. So it's very much about relationship, having place in relationship, security in relationship. And so if I think that you're looking at me in a way that you want to put me out of the relationship, that's probably the experience of shame. Okay. Now I was mentioning there's healthy and unhealthy shame. Healthy shame comes up when we've sort of crossed a boundary, when we violated something in our humanity, and we feel it and we begin to see the implications of that in our relationships, and then we correct and it goes away. And I would even say that most of the time healthy shame is experienced differently in the body. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you saw that. Oh, did you hear me do that? It's more up here. It's like it could be embarrassment, it could be humiliation, right? But it's up here, and once I course correct, it begins to fade and go away. Versus, and I'll go way down here, down actually like in my gut.
In your gut?
Down
your stomach?
in my gut, way down there, right? That sort of knot of worthlessness, that lump of emptiness, and that says you're horrible, you'll never get any better. That's toxic shame or carried shame, and that does not serve us at all, because it doesn't go away, because it's not the result of what we've done, it's the result of something done to us. Therefore nothing we can do can make it go away.
So helpful though, even just to check in with our bodies. Where am I feeling this shame?
Yes.
And it sounds like when it's much lower, below the diaphragm in your gut, that can become chronic shame.
Right. That can become chronic shame, carried shame, toxic shame. I use those all interchangeably.
Okay. So why is this so important to understand, specifically for this crowd of men who are outgrowing pornography?
So it's important because your healthy shame will serve you well. Your chronic shame will not. And you've got to figure out the difference between the two. And you've got to figure out how to let the healthy shame serve you with God's intended purpose, and how to walk away from the chronic shame, the toxic shame that will not serve you well.
This is already mind-blowing, because shame is something that we so often demonize.
Sure.
And yet at the same time, we feel it so deeply.
And we also intuitively know that shame has a good purpose and function. And we know this because we say things like, don't be shameless, right? Don't act in a shameless way. He was shameless about it. What is that saying? This person's doing something about which they ought to feel shame, but they're doing it anyway. So our language betrays that we actually do understand that shame has a function. And shame, since we're talking about shame is the first emotion mentioned in the Bible, right? It's the very first emotion that is named in the Bible. The end of Genesis chapter 2, they were naked and not ashamed, right? So here's Adam, here's Eve. They're naked. They're with each other in the Garden of Paradise. They walk with God in the cool of the day, and they feel no shame. And then, interestingly, a few verses later, the beginning of chapter 3, they eat the forbidden fruit, and it says, and their eyes were open, and they knew that they were naked, and then they covered themselves with fig leaves. They covered their groins. It was not a sexual sin, and yet it had a sexual consequence. And they had the experience of shame whereby they began to cover themselves, hide themselves from each other and from God. So shame is a deeply spiritual experience. Shame is often very closely intertwined with sexuality, even if its origins aren't sexual. And shame makes us isolate from one another and from God. So if you think about that, I often draw this picture. So imagine here's the earth, all right? And here's God up here, and God created the earth, and he creates human beings to rule over the earth, all right? Under him. So they're over the earth, under God, and you could draw two lines. You could draw one line between God and humans, separating creator from creatures, because in that way humans are part of creation. But you could also draw a line under human beings, separating God and humanity from the rest of creation, because they bear the image of God. And so humans occupy this interesting space, more than mere creatures, less than God. We're the only thing that occupies that space. I believe shame is what we feel when we try to cross those boundaries one way or the other. Oh, you won't die. Your eyes will be open and you'll become like God, knowing good and evil, like God, trying to cross that boundary and be like the creator. But we also feel shame, Romans 1 talks about, when we act like mere creatures, mere beasts, and we follow our most base lusts and passions. And so we cross that line below and we act like we don't bear the image of God. Either one of those things is going to make us begin to feel shame. Okay, but once we correct and we get back in our space, but once we know our role, the shame will dissipate if it's healthy shame.